Hello, hello everyone, and welcome. I think I'm online. I'm never really sure sometimes when live. If you can see me, please pop by, give me a like, leave a comment so that I know you're here. Um, so this week in Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, I'm looking at persistence. And in a way, this whole exercise is one in persistence because I've been going with this for a little while now, I think July, and I'm not even fully through the book. I think I'm about three-quarters of the way through the book. And it's tempting at this point to go, oh, well, no one's watching, no one's paying attention. Well, I know that one person's watching. I'll look forward to hearing who it is soon. And it's tempting to go, oh, well, I may as well just give up. There's no point. And to be honest, there are days where I wonder this. But let me just firstly do a show and tell and say that my little cards with my daily kind of goals are still here. Hubby thinks I'm super weird, but he's away for 2 months. So while he is away, I'm going to be using these a lot more to reiterate my daily kind of goals. And my big one, as many of you know, is 100,000 podcasts by Christmas. So it's not quite there yet, but it is actually doing quite well. I'm going to multitask and get an update. But as of this morning, it was about 17,400, which is a lot better than, say, not having a podcast at all and then starting this. Hello, lovely Yvette. How are you? So good to have you here. You're in Melbourne, right? Hope you are doing better. It looks like the news is getting a bit better and things are slowly getting there, but it's still a while yet. So it is really easy in the face of not getting the traction you want to give up. And it's really easy to, when you're doing things that are kind of a bit too out there for most people to also get up, to also give up. So persistence is really, really important. And Hill has some great quotes in this chapter. As many of you know, that sometimes I sort of feel that Hill spends a lot of time of each chapter talking about the next chapter or the last chapter, usually the next chapter. But in this chapter, he's actually got some really good examples that are actually relevant to the topic of persistence. I know that sounds a bit weird and probably a little bit cynical, but I actually like some of the examples that he's used. He's got an odd one towards the end, but I actually do that. Yvette said, and many more will on replay. Congrats on the peace bell ringing and the great ideas for goal cards. Thank you, Yvette. Yvette's just seen my Facebook post from today. In Canberra, there's a peace bowl in the Narra Peace Park in on the shores of Lake Burley Griffin, so not far from Parliament House and looking out to the National Museum of Australia. This is an initiative of the Rotary Club of Canberra Burley Griffin. I hope I've got the name right. I seem to not always. I'm a member of the Zonta Club of Canberra Breakfast, and they every year on the 10th of December they jointly hold with that Rotary Club a bell ringing event to commemorate the women and children who've lost their lives to family and domestic violence throughout Australia. It's quite a moving ceremony. So I met there today with a member of the Rotary Club to make connections and start that early process of organisation. It'll be a team event. It's just I happened to meet him today, and while I was there, he asked me if I would like the opportunity to bring the peace bell. So he brought the striker out, and we both had a go, and it was just beautiful. So sending out and reverberating that positivity and that love and that peace. And actually, now that I think of it, it's very similar to what Napoleon Hill talks about in terms of the vibrations and sending things out into the ether. So, you mightn't think that anyone hears this, but you're sending it out, and that's really significant. But back to persistence. So Hill has some really great quotes in this chapter. And so there's a lot of things that, are really inspiring and really make a difference. So he says the basis of persistence is the power of will. Men, and everything's men in his books, men who accumulate great fortunes are generally known as cold-blooded and sometimes ruthless. Often they're misunderstood. He doesn't give very good examples here in terms of people who are deep down huge philanthropists. In our day and age, you could probably think of people like Bill Gates who, have accumulated great fortunes but have gone on to do great things in philanthropy. But he just goes on and says that people like Henry Ford have been generally misunderstood to be ruthless and cold-blooded. And this misconception, he believes, came out of their persistence traits. But that said, you know, he says that the word persistence, the quality is to the character of man what carbon is to steel. So persistence is really about going hard and continuing to do it, no matter what. And he's got lots and lots of checklists in this chapter of what things mean. So he says, at the heart of persistence is really a definite purpose. And that makes sense because if you're not really strong about your goal, it's so easy to give up, isn't it? I have just been doing the Couch to 5K um, kind of program, and I had a real goal of being able to run non-stop for 30 minutes, and I got that goal. And then after I got that goal, I was like, oh yeah, well, this is a bit easy, and I got slower and slower, and then I kind of stopped for about a week, but now I'm back into it, and now I've got a goal. So now I need to set a new goal of going faster, I think, or having a specific goal, which is I guess why people do races. Because if you don't have that definite goal, if you're just like, oh, I'll just run around for the love of it, you sort of go, oh, well, actually this is tiring and it's a bit boring, I just won't bother. So setting that goal is actually really, really, really important with this. And the starting point of all achievement, he says, is desire. Keep this constantly in mind. Weak desires bring weak results. And if you think about it, like any kind of, great success does involve, some kind of, real effort and that willingness to break through. I had a meeting last week with one of my husband's family members who's was a very, very successful public servant, and she had been through some really difficult times, including, she said, a poison pen letter. Someone had left an anonymous letter on her desk, basically accusing her of being too close to the male boss, which had been quite hurtful. Now, I would have probably been devastated with something like that. She just sort of stood up and immediately told everyone, who left this? What a joke. And she said, well, I had to be tough because that's just what I had to do to survive. So, if you have a real goal, if that's something you want to do that keeps you going, things are really easy. My boys love watching rugby league. They're so excited that the Raiders have got into the sort of finals for I forget what you call it, but anyway, there's potentially 2 games away from a grand final, and the next one playing Melbourne Storm. And we always joke that they make it look easy in a way, but when you see them in the dressing rooms, and they always show way too much skin, but you can see how many bandages they have on. They always seem to be away with injury, and things are really, really tough and difficult. So even like athletes at their peak performance, you assume it's all easy for them, but it's still pretty painful. Forces gravitate to men whose minds have been prepared to attract them just as surely as water gravitates to the ocean. So this is classic law of attraction principles. Like attracts like. So because of that, you have to have that sense of your desire and what you want, and put it out there, and it'll attract what it is. So he's got a number of different ideas for attracting things, and there'll be a big list, so I won't go into too much details. But basically, mastermind is very essential to this process. Having a group of people who will support you is really important. And going back to that concept of law of attraction, he says that poverty is attracted to one whose mind is favorable to it, as money is attracted to him whose mind has been deliberately prepared to attract it, and through the same laws. So, it's that law of attraction. If you're thinking poverty, thinking of lack of money, that's what you will attract. If you're thinking abundance and thinking lots of money coming in, that's also what you attract. So, that's kind of what that happens. Um, there is no substitute for persistence, he says. It cannot be supplanted by any other quality. Remember this, and it will hearten you in the beginning when the going may seem difficult and slow. So it's all about persistence. Yeah, and I would really agree with that. As a writer, sometimes things seem easy. I've had a year that on the surface looks like it's been fairly successful. I'm now a columnist with the Herald Sun, Daily Telegraph, and others. But behind that was like nearly a year, really, of back and forth, and about 3 times before that happened that it didn't happen. And even so, every week I've got deadlines, I've got editorial comments, I've got a whole range of things happening in the background that I have to manage. It's not something that comes super easy. I don't know anyone who does. You don't suddenly go, "Oh, I'm going to be a writer and have instant success." One of a course that I did a couple of years ago, back in 2015, so 5 years ago, a course called Hard Copy for Developing Writers, run by the ACT Writers Centre. We had the lovely Mary Kinane, who's a former literary agent, speaking, and her big motto is persistence pays. The amount of stories that there are out there about, writers who've had manuscript after manuscript after manuscript that have been rejected, and yet they get back and they keep writing. And that's harder than you might think. I had a manuscript on that program in 2015 about post-baby confinement. And overall, the comments were positive, but I sat down one-on-one with 10 literary agents and publishers in the last weekend of that program as part of it, and got feedback. And I was so stymied by that process that it took me about 6 months before I was able to look at the manuscript again, because it was really quite intimidating having things sort of ripped apart and deconstructed. I think one publisher said, "Well, I guess this is an early draft then," because he'd gone through and picked up every single typo or every single misspelling. Like, it's quite confronting sort of things to deal with. But the truly successful writers are the ones who keep going, keep going past that. And there were a number in our group who just, yeah, they got those criticism and they just stopped. They just went, "Oh, well, I'll never be a good writer then." And, even thinking back, I once got a B for an essay I'd written, and I was always a straight A plus English student. And I'd gone to a new school and I got a B, and I was horrified. And for years, I thought I was a bad writer on the basis of that, which is pretty stupid, right? Because I was always an A plus student. Everyone knew I loved writing and I loved reading and I was good at English. So, it is that power of persistence to keep going in the face of negative criticism is really important. And Hill's got some words on that as well. And he says that, a lot of this whole concept of being able to get back up after you're down, he says every failure brings with it the seed of an equivalent advantage, which is pretty powerful stuff. So every time you fail, and actually I don't like the word fail. Like, I hate it when people say, like they might have been married for 20 years and then they break up and they say my marriage has failed. Well, no, you might have had a successful marriage for a number of years, but things have changed. But say something doesn't work out, well, there'll be the seed of an equivalent advantage that will be there. So it all kinds of goes back. And then he says that as he writes this, so he lives in New York, and he's mentioned this previously, that he lives in central New York. As I look up from my work, he sees less than a block away the great mysterious Broadway, the graveyard of dead hopes, and the front porch of opportunity. So what he's talking about is Broadway, and the amount of people who make or break their fortunes on Broadway. It's been a long, long history of people going to New York to seek fame, seek fortune, and particularly stardom on Broadway. And a lot of people make it, and a lot of people don't make it. And so then he gives the example of Fannie Hurst, who came to New York in 1915, and she spent 4 years. It didn't quite work out. She was a writer. One publisher, the Saturday Evening Post, sent her 36 rejection slips, but then she broke the ice and got a story across. So then there came the payoff, he calls, having been tested by this. Like, after 4 years, right? 4 years of not getting any successful writing, a lot of people would give up at that time. From that time on, publishers made a beaten path to her door. Money came so fast she hardly had time to count it. Then the moving picture men discovered her, noting this is back, in the early days of movies. And money came not in small change, but in floods. The moving picture rights to her latest novel, Great Laughter, brought $100,000. Noting that this book was published in 1937, said to be the highest price ever paid for a story before publication. So the royalties from the sale of the book probably will run much more. So, this is just a good example of persistence. And you can imagine a lot of people go every year to, Broadway to make a name of themselves, and most don't make it, but some really do. So many people, go to Hollywood to, make it big in movies, and most will fail, but some will make it. Some will really make it. And one story that really comes to mind is the story of Taiwanese director Ang Lee An. And many of you know that he has won two Academy Awards for directing. I'm a huge fan of his work, especially his early work, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, which is set in Taiwan. I just love. And as I was sort of first learning Chinese and learning about Taiwanese culture, and I spent a fair bit of time in Taiwanese culture. I haven't been back for a while though. After COVID, it's on my list of places to visit. It's relatively safe in COVID. They've dealt with it well, thankfully. Um, but he is really quite a brilliant director. Now, the story was that his dad never approved of him studying to be a director. He didn't agree with it, and his wife married him, notwithstanding the fact that this would mean that he was choosing this path would mean he was cut off for his family. So he went to the US, he studied to be a director. And then for many years, he just didn't make it. He would just send in script after script after script that kept being rejected. And he has this lovely story he's written about how, during this time, his wife, I think from memory, she's a scientist. And, I probably should have read up on this more recently. I'll see if I can find the story and share it. His wife was a scientist, and she was out working, and he was home taking care of their son, and he became a really good cook. During this time, he really had a love of the culinary, and that's reflected in a lot of his movies too. Eat, Drink, Man, Woman is a story about a Taiwanese chef and the amazing things that he creates. So all that kind of flavor and everything comes through in his filmmaking. But anyway, he relates this story that he's sitting on the back step, waiting for his wife to come home after she's had a long day at work. And she comes home and he says to her, "Look, enough's enough. I'm not going to make it. So I've decided I'm going to enroll in a course to do IT." And she basically looked at him and said, "You are not going to do that. That is not you. This is what you want to do. This is your passion. Just do it." And he did. And he's, a phenomenal success now at what he does. But, it took huge persistence. And you can imagine in that kind of culture, and I spent a lot of time in Taiwanese culture, it's very rare for, the man to be the stay at home carer of the family. And also he had to have that break with his family in order to pursue his chosen path, and it definitely wasn't easy. There, definitely aren't many Asian men in film, although it's changing a little bit, and certainly not many in directing as well. But he was persistent, and it paid off for him. So that is a really important story. And then she says, he relates a story of someone else I don't know called Kate Smith. So she was basically a singer, and she eventually made it, and so became a star. But you could think of any number of people who have come from backgrounds where they've made it against the odds with this, and I'd love to hear your favorite. So persistence is a state of mind, so it can be cultivated. So it's based on definite causes, and these are the definite causes on which persistence is based. A, definiteness of purpose. Knowing what one wants is the first and perhaps the most important step towards development of persistence. So you've got to know what you want. Desire. It's comparatively easy to acquire and maintain persistence in pursuing the object of intense desire. So you often hear of people who've got that, I don't know, they've been cheated out of something, or they've got something to prove. They really, really, really want something. They want it bad. Something's happened in their life and they want it bad. They've grown up really poor, and they've, vowed to themselves that one day I'm going to be really wealthy and I'm going to buy that house up the street, or whatever it is. So that sense of desire is really, really strong, and it often comes out of hardship or something unfair that's happened, but not always. C, self-reliance. Belief in one's ability to carry out a plan encourages one to follow the plan through with persistence. So, not waiting on other people, doing it yourself. D, definiteness of plans. Organized plans, even though they may be weak and entirely impractical, encourage persistence. As many of you know, I didn't actually like his chapter on organized planning so much. He spent way too much time talking about other things that weren't to do with planning, including things like leadership and how to get a job. And the sort of section on capitalistic opportunities was actually quite small. But, basically, you've got to have a plan. In this day and age, we'd probably say have a business plan. Uh, E, accurate knowledge. Knowing that one's plans are sound based upon experience or observation encourages persistence. Guessing instead of knowing destroys persistence. So, know what you're doing. So do a bit of research in it. F, cooperation. Cooperation with others. So this feeds into his mastermind point. G, willpower. The habit of concentrating one's thoughts upon the building of plans for the attainment of a definite purpose. H, habit. So fear, the worst of all enemies, can be effectively cured by forced repetition of acts of courage. Everyone who has seen active service in war knows this. And that's actually quite interesting because when you are scared about things, you take, like a little step and then back and a little bit more of a step and then back. They've done some research into people suffering from PTSD, and that's pretty much how you overcome it. Not straight away, but like bit by bit. Like, for instance, if you've had a horrific car accident and it's so scary that you can't bear to be in a car and drive again, like the thought of a car flips you out, like you do things step by step. Like one day it might just be like opening the car door. The next it might be sitting in the driver's seat. The third it might be putting your hands on the wheel, and you just sit with that until you're uncomfortable, and then it's pretty scary, and then you move away. And then the next day it might be driving to the end of the street. And so you just, every time you're doing something that's a little bit leaning into that fear and that scare, that how you're scared about that and overcoming it, the worst thing you can do is just turn off it completely. So they are some of the things that will make persistence work. And then he's got a long list of the weaknesses which must be mastered by all who accumulate riches. And it's quite interesting because there's 16 of these, and they're a lot longer actually than the positives about persistence. But they're kind of interesting. So let's go through with them and see if any of them resonate for you personally. Some do for me. 1, failure to recognize and clearly define exactly what one wants. I'm thinking the Spice Girls here, like, tell me what you want, what you really, really want. But quite seriously, you ask people, a lot of people, like, they'll complain about their job and you'll say to them, well, what job do you want? And they can't answer it. I don't like my car. Well, what car do you want? Like, give ourselves permission to dream a little bit here. What is it that you want? Like, when you've got something that's really clear and you want it, it's really quite special. And sometimes we want things because we think other people, that we should have those or different things. Like last week, it was my birthday, and my Neil asked me, well, what do you want? And I went, well, actually, I'm pretty happy with most things. And then I stopped and I thought about it, and he said, oh, do you want to go out to dinner? I said, oh, maybe. And then I thought, yeah, okay, let's go out to dinner. We'll go out to the restaurant where we went on our first date and when we got engaged. And I like it then. We haven't been there for a while. It's a Malaysian Chinese restaurant, and it was lovely because it was nice, and we were out together at somewhere that was significant for us. And then he said to me, well, what do you want to eat? And I was kind of like, well, I don't know. I haven't really decided. I'll choose one dish, you choose another dish. And he said, well, it's your birthday, you choose everything, whatever you want. And I went, oh, well, this changes the equation. What do I actually want on this menu? Not, well, I'm not ordering about what you think, what I think you want. I'm ordering what I want. And so then I sat with it for a bit and went, well, what do I want? So, okay, I'll order whatever I want. I know it's really, I felt a bit selfish actually, to be honest, because you're not conditioned with that. And then we came home and I thought, well, what else do I want? And I was like, well, actually, I really like playing rummy. So we sat down and played rummy, played a game that's sort of a bit like mahjong with tiles, and that's what I really like to do. Like, I could have sort of gone, oh well, it's my birthday, I should have a dozen red stemmed roses, but I don't really want those. So what I actually wanted was quite different. So back to this list. Number 2, procrastination with or without cause. I mean, I never procrastinate, I'm sure. I'm laughing because I've got a couple of articles I was going to write today. They're not due today, but I like to get things done early. 3, lack of interest in acquiring specialized knowledge. He is very big throughout this book about, how everyone has a responsibility for continuous learning. And some people are a bit like, well, I didn't learn it at school, so I don't know how to do it. So never, ever leave that as an excuse, whether it's a language, whether it's a trade, whether it's a skill, whatever it is, go and learn it. 4, indecision, the habit of passing the buck on all occasions instead of facing the issue squarely, also backed by alibis. The dog ate my homework, that type of thing. And actually, I did once have a dog who ate a library book, I kid you not, and it was really embarrassing because, everyone thought I was making that up, but, the dog did actually eat the library book. It was embarrassing. 5, the habit of relying upon alibis instead of creating definite plans for the solution of problems. Similar to passing the buck, but also, I've got a headache today. I don't have time to make a plan. 6, self-satisfaction. He said there's little remedy for this. So I don't really know what he means by this, but I guess it's, like I'm pretty happy with myself. I'm so happy with myself, I don't want to do anything. Now, actually, from a Taoist kind of point of view, they do believe that when you're satisfied and happy in yourself, it's like one of the biggest forms of spiritual bliss, that that eternal seeking is kind of what's going to make us unhappy. But I just accept I'm an A plus plus person, so I just live with that. But he sees it as a negative. 7, indifference, usually reflected in one's readiness to compromise on all occasions rather than meet opposition and fight it. So you just don't care, whatever. 8, blaming others for one's mistakes and accepting unfavorable circumstances as being unavoidable. It's always someone else's fault. 9, weakness of desire due to neglect in the choice of motives that impel action. I'm not exactly sure, but I guess unclear. And then not just lack of unclearness and across the board. 10, willingness, even eagerness to quit at the first sign of defeat. Yeah. There's someone in our broader family who wanted to do something and sort of set up a Facebook page and did a few things. And then after a few months, and she seemed to be doing quite well with it, sort of as a side hustle. I asked her mum how she's doing. She said, oh, it's never going to work. So she stopped. I was like, really? Like, honestly, only just begun. 11, lack of organised plans placed in writing where they may be analysed. So you need to put those plans down in writing. Just having them up here isn't going to work. They need to be down. 12, the habit of neglecting to move on ideas or to grasp opportunity when it presents itself. So you've got the idea, you've got the divine intuition that's telling you to do something, but you never actually do it. And I'm sure we all know people who are going to do things, and they're always going to do. Similar to this is number 13, wishing instead of willing, wishing that things would be right. You'd have that right time, right opportunity rather than making it happen. 14, the habit of compromising with poverty instead of aiming at riches. General absence of ambition to be, to do, and to own. That's a deep one because some people from a spiritual point of view think that riches are bad. But the lovely Susie Cherub here in Canberra often says there's nothing spiritual about poverty. Like it is actually okay to want to be wealthy. It's the attachment to the money rather than the money itself. It's complicated, but it's not not compromising and saying, oh, we'll always be poor is, I guess, what he's getting at. 15, searching for all the shortcuts to riches, trying to get without giving a fair equivalent. Usually reflected in things like gambling, endeavouring to drive sharp bargains. Yeah, that's an interesting one. It's that you see it in investing all the time, the get rich quick. But I hadn't equated it with endeavouring to drive sharp bargains as part of it. But that probably makes sense. It's those people who, they want to buy a house and they'll try and really, really be nasty about it. They probably will never get it. And 16, which is the big one, fear of criticism. Failure to create plans and put them into action because of what other people will think, say, or do. This enemy belongs at the head of the list because it generally exists in one's subconscious mind where its presence is not recognized. And then he goes on and talks a little bit more about the fear of criticism Interestingly, he said that a lot of people make mistakes in marriage, stand by the bargain, and go through life miserable and unhappy because they fear criticism, which may follow if they correct the mistake. Now, I think he was married 3 times, so he's probably speaking from experience there. But, obviously, people who get married make a solemn vow. And so I think deciding to stay in a marriage isn't just one of criticism, it's also one of ethics, morals. The promise and commitment they've made, family reasons, and sometimes also religion and other things. But he sees that staying in an unhappy marriage is largely because of worrying about criticism. So that's interesting. A lot of people don't go on and get further education, he says, because they're worried that they're going to be criticised. And then a lot of people allow relatives to wreck their lives in the name of duty because they fear criticism. So doing what they think is expected of them because they fear criticism, that's a big one, especially for women, especially like the youngest child who, for instance, who thinks that their duty is to look after their parent, or they're not allowed to get married, or they're not allowed to do things. This can be quite a trap. So this is an interesting one. People who refuse to take chances in business because they fear criticism if they fail. Interesting. So he goes on and on about, this fear of criticism and, how incredibly difficult it is. And I guess this fear of public speaking is something that when people are talking about being scared to have public speaking, it's often about criticism too. My oldest, who's 11, came back today, and he's in grade 5, and as part of that they've got to have like a market stall, which is going ahead this year even in COVID, although other activities aren't. And in his group of 6, he was the only one who was willing to make a pitch about what their product or in this case it's a service was going to be. And he's actually quite good about it, but he's actually quite scared, he said, about worrying about what people are going to say. Like he's worried about the criticism. Like he worries he's going to say something, people are going to say nasty things or ask questions. So we brain shopped that. And of course, me being me, I immediately asked him some difficult questions, and he sort of looked at me blankly, and I said, yeah, it's not that I don't think your service is good. I'm just thinking about what other people will think. We workshopped some answers to that. Anyway, the basic point is it's not insurmountable. So and he said most ideas therefore are stillborn, and so because of the fear of criticism, most ideas just never ever got off the ground. And then he goes on and gives them examples of some people who have overcome persistence, but they're not people I've known, and I think they're quite dated US examples, so I'm not even going to go there. But what I am going to move forward to is to talk about his 4 steps for how to develop persistence. The 4 simple steps which lead to the habit of persistence. The steps are 1, and none of these will actually be new. He's talked about these the whole chapter anyway. 1, a definite purpose backed by burning desire for its fulfillment. So this definite purpose. 2, a definite plan expressed in continuous action. So having a plan like a business plan and, maybe action steps. So not just, a perfect plan that just sits on the shelf, but actually breaking it down like project management style. 3, a mind closed tightly against all negative and discouraging influences, including negative suggestions of relatives, friends, and acquaintances. So when you hear people who say, oh, that'll never work, sort of go, yes, thank you for sharing, and just completely disregard it and continue nonetheless, which is actually really hard to do. 4, a friendly alliance with one or more persons who will encourage one to follow through with both plan and purpose. In other words, a mastermind. So the mastermind is really, really important. So, and he stresses that time and time in the book. So moving forward, he then has 2 unusual main kind of case studies, and they are unusual, I think, probably reflecting a time and place in which I am at, which is different from he is. But, he wrote this in the 1930s, where the big scandal of the day was Mrs. Wallace Simpson, falling in love with the King of England who abdicated his throne. Now, he's writing as an American who's probably pro Mrs. Wallace Simpson. If he was writing as an Englishman, he'd probably have a different view on this. But, he, talked about, how her love for this man was not accidental nor the result of favorable breaks. It was a burning desire and careful searching at every step of the way. Her first duty was to love. Well, I feel a bit sorry for her first husband, but let's not go there. But, basically, she knew what she wanted, not after she met the Prince of Wales, but long before that. So, she knew what she wanted. She was persistent. She went after him. It's this magnificent love story that was so significant that, he abdicated his throne to be with her. Like I said, it's kind of a bit of an odd kind of story to share for a number of reasons. And, there's since, in more recent years, there's been documentaries that have suggested that the pair of them, particularly him, had ties. Edward had ties to the Nazi regime and, spent most of their latter life sort of in France and sort of in semi-exile. But, I obviously don't know the source of the veracity of that. But certainly he's got a, beautiful, touching love story that is very pro Mrs. Wallace Simpson, which, like I said, had he been an Englishman, it might have had a different view of that. And then he finishes with, and this would not have happened, I'm sure, had this book been written in 2020, with a tribute to the persistence of Muhammad, which was really interesting to include in 1937. And he includes here a review by someone called Thomas Sugru, who has written a review on the beginning of Islam. But there's some important bits here. Basically, he said Muhammad was not a prophet. He never performed a miracle. He was not a mystic. He had no formal schooling. He did not begin his mission until he was 40. So when he first announced that he was the messenger of God, he was ridiculed and labelled a lunatic. Children tripped him and women threw filth upon him. He was banished from Mecca and he had been preaching 10 years. After he'd been preaching 10 years, he had nothing to show for it but banishment, poverty, and ridicule. So you can imagine, how it must have been for him. He's quite late in life. He's not like, a young person. Uh, he's, got this message that he's very passionate about. No one else believes it necessarily. He's banished from his hometown after 10 years. He doesn't really have much to show for it. But then the story goes on and says, and I'm quoting this, these are not my views, just to be clear. Yet before another 10 years had passed, he was dictator of all of Arabia, ruler of Mecca, and the head of a new world religion which was to sweep to the Danube and the Pyrenees before exhausting the impetus he gave it. So that impetus was threefold: the power of words, the efficacy of prayer, and man's kinship with God. His career never made sense, he goes on. And so it's quite interesting. So it's basically an interesting review to think about, what an incredible story of persistence it was for Muhammad to set up what we now know as Islam. That he did that, despite the odds. And yet it has ended up becoming a major faith, a major religion, a world religion as a result of his faith. So those are the main things that are in this chapter. There is a whole lot of lists and there's a lot of thinking. But going back to this list of 4 things, and of course I'm not going to be able to find it now. Let's see if I can remember it. But the first one is a definite purpose, a definite plan, not listening to the negatives from well-meaning friends and family, just, listening to them, that's fine, but just not taking them on board. 4, and having a mastermind. And those 4 things will help you have the persistence to go forward. And I would agree with that. I think, being able to go forward no matter what. The amount of times people have told me things were crazy, and yet you go ahead. And a really good example of that too is my lovely father, who I'm very close to. I really wanted to learn Mandarin. It was something that I was really passionate about. I first started learning in 1993. I decided to study it. I discovered that I loved it and I really wanted to go to China. And he told me there was no point learning Mandarin Chinese because there were so many Chinese people in Australia who spoke English fluently. I would never have a use for it. Yet, against the odds, I deferred my studies. I worked full time. I earned some money, saved some money. I got a bank loan, went overseas and learnt Mandarin to a standard that, I'm a bit rusty at the moment, but to a standard that I could have a phone call with someone and they wouldn't know that I was Aussie. And all of that was only possible because I was really persistent and I was really clear about what I wanted to do. Which reminds me, I probably should actually make sure I don't get too rusty and keep that up. Anyway, thank you so much to those of you who've listened. I would love to hear your story of persistence and your story about how you've made breakthroughs and kept going with things in your life. Reminds me of Barbara. What's her name? Barbara Streisand's song "I Will Never Give Up," which is one of my favorites. I think I'm going to share this on the Facebook group as well. Thank you so much.